Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sonar Summit. Today, I'll be talking about software engineering plus AI and what this all means for the tech industry. I'm Gergely, and I'm most well known for writing the Pragmatic Engineer, where I cover big tech and startups from the inside. Before starting this publication, I worked as a software engineer and engineering manager at Uber, software engineer at Skyscanner, and before that at Microsoft. I now say Microsoft, but I used to say Skype or on Xbox One, and before that at JP Morgan. And it was 11 years ago, or maybe even 12 years ago now, when I worked at Microsoft/Skype, where I first came across Sonar. A team next to me at Skype had just installed and started to use SonarQube for their CI/CD, and they were raving about how useful it was, how it found errors, and how it gave them a safety net. So that's a pretty cool connection. And I've been coming across and using SonarQube on and off throughout the years. At Skyscanner also had teams using it, and I've come across it earlier as well. But today I wanted to get into this fear, uncertainty, and doubt that we're seeing about AI as software engineers. Because on one hand, we have these headlines going around in mainstream media. I'm sure you're seeing it all the time. For example, Mark Zuckerberg saying that AI will replace mid-level engineers soon. About a year ago, Wired writing how vibe coding is coming for software engineering jobs, very definite framing, our industry is over. And also how venture VCs, Didi is a VC, he's saying how we've now crossed this intangible threshold of AI coming for most software because of Opus 4.5. And on the other hand, we have things like AI agents causing a bunch of damage when deployed in the wild. This was a year ago, and AI agents have gotten better. But in this example, the AI agent just cost this small company a few $1,000s in damages because of just adding too much observability. And in December of last year, so only 2 months ago, I talked with the CTO at a fintech startup, and they said that their company trialed AI code review tools focused on security. They trialed a bunch of them, and this did not include Sonar, by the way. But this tool flagged that they were not encrypting the last 4 digits of credit cards and said, oh, we should encrypt it. And this developer was about to accept the change. Now, this is a terrible suggestion if you work in payments, or because the last 4 digits of a credit card are not personal identifiable information. And so this CTO said, all right, we're done. We're terminating this tool because it's not helping us. We then also have examples of founders saying that they're moving away from AI coding completely because the output has gotten harder to review. And this was just in December. So we have these conflicting signals that CEOs and AI companies are saying, it's the end of software engineering, and some people on the ground saying, well, it's not really working as we're hoping that it was. Which one is actually true? Now, as part of the Pragmatic Engineer, I talk with a lot of software engineers at a lot of different companies. And so I asked them, how are you using AI tools? And I got details from a few different categories. AI dev tool startups, big tech companies, more traditional companies, and also from independent software engineers. So let's walk through these one by one. Let's start with AI dev tool startups. So let's talk about Cursor. I visited Cursor's offices back in October. These are some photos from the office. It's a really cozy office, and they have this culture of you need to take your shoes off, and those shoes are either an unorganized mess, and sometimes they get organized, like it's like some sorting algorithm, and it's basically just people coming around and some of them organizing it. It's really amusing. They're a really friendly group of people. Now, internally inside of the company, it's not surprising. There's massive internal usage. Back in October already, they had 2-3 parallel models used as the norm. This was before they released this feature where you can run parallel models. And they have cool things like whenever a linear ticket is opened, it's automatically one-shotted with cursor, and then the developer can review it. So like tickets are and oftentimes they accept it, or they might make some small changes, but so tickets are almost immediately closed. It's pretty cool. Even back then, and this was in October, and things have changed a lot, but back then, 40 to 50% of Cursor's code was written by Cursor, and they had about 300 unique agentic sessions per day per dev, and about 50 tabs per dev per day. So internally, they were using agents a lot more and tabs a lot less. And Cursor have just released new data on what they're seeing in usage, and they're saying that their users are now using agents a lot more than tabbing. Cursor's value proposition used to be that you just like tap, tap, tap. They even have this golden tab button, and now it's all agents. So agentic usage is just going up. And one thing that I really like about Cursor, this is from my deep dive of building Cursor back in the middle of last year in the Pragmatic Engineer, is how their core value is engineers just should be a lot more productive. And everything they're building is around this. Now, I just want to remind everyone that these AI startups, including Cursor, are a bit different than most companies. Everyone is really, really technical at Cursor. And here's a good example. Lee Robinson, who heads up developer relations at Cursor, he just went in and he migrated the whole Cursor.com from its CMS to raw code at Markdown. And he used Cursor for this. And he actually wrote a blog post about it. But this is how technical people are. And again, anyone who works, for example, at marketing at Cursor or any other function, they write a bunch of code, of course, using Cursor. But this is not the norm at most companies, or at least not of yet. Now let's move on to OpenAI. OpenAI, I also visited their offices also in October. Here's some photos that I took from my time there. You cannot take photos from most parts of OpenAI. These were the allowed areas. But their office doesn't really have kind of, I wouldn't say it has like as unique characteristics as, let's say, Cursor with their quirky things. But what I did get as details from talking with folks at OpenAI, first of all, unlimited usage of ChatGPT and Codex, obviously. It is the norm to run several Codex agents in parallel, especially on the Codex team. That's just absolutely the norm. They have this cool thing where in the internal OpenAI app, there's a fix it button, and you can tap it whenever you see something, and you can just describe what the problem is. And it one-shots a fix that goes up as a pull request that an engineer on the app team can just accept or tweak. And another thing that's relevant for OpenAI is everyone who I talk to says when we will get to AGI, this and this will happen. And it's not an if, it's a when, and people are just convinced about it. This was just very interesting to see, and it felt very different than some of the other AI labs that I talked with. So this felt pretty distinctive to OpenAI. I also shared fresh details of how Codex is built. In the Pragmatic Engineer, you can read it as a deep dive. This is quite fresh, about 1 or 2 weeks old. More than 90% of the Codex app was generated by Codex itself. And a typical engineer on the Codex team runs between 4 to 8 parallel agents. And when I talked with Thibaut, the head of engineering at Codex, he was telling me that people run around with their laptops in their hands, kind of not closed because they have agents running, and so they walk around in the office like with their laptop like this, and then like check, add a little agent, close it but not all the way, and just walk around the office. He said it's amusing, and this is something that is quite new. Like it did not happen just a few months before. Now moving on to Anthropic, the other major lab, again visited them in October, and I also talked with Boris Cherny, the creator of Claude Code. I will have a fresh podcast episode going out with him very soon, but I also did a deep dive with him, and what he told me is when they gave Claude Code access to engineers, this was back in February of 2025, so a year ago, they all started using it every day, and this was really, really surprising. And they released Claude Code in public in May in 2025, and in December already, Boris said how he did not open his IDE at all, and Opus 4.5 wrote about all of his pull requests, every single line of them. And he was saying how software engineering is changing. And the hardest part is to readjust expectations. And Boris is someone, in my podcast, I touch on this. He is a very, very good software engineer. When he worked at Meta, and he worked there for about, I think, 6 or 7 years, he contributed some of the most diffs, as pull requests are called, inside of Meta for a few years straight. I think with number 2 or number 3. So he was a very productive engineer. And now he's just transitioned into letting the AI generate the code that he's writing. Now, an interesting learning that I got at Anthropic, where I talked with, again, Boris and one of the founders and a bunch of engineers, is that Anthropic is still a research company at heart. They're not a company that produces coding tools, which is very interesting to see because they have produced some of the most used coding developer tools. Like companies who are building coding tools that are their mission, they're not doing nearly as well as this research company who is just, happens to produce coding tools. And Boris told me this a few times, that how they just want people to feel the raw model as much as possible. This is the goal with all the tools that they release. Claude Code was also built and released to help make the core model better. This was when the team built Claude Code, they realized it's picking up internally in usage, but they were debating whether to release this at all because they weren't sure if this is an alpha or something that speeds them up compared to other labs. But in the end, they decided to release it because they figured they can get more information about the model when it's out there. And this approach of focusing on research, it really seems to be working with them. My sense, having talked with a bunch of these AI startups and labs, is Anthropic of all of them is focused the most on coding out of all of them. And this seems to have been working really well for them. Now, after the AI dev tool startups, let's move on to big tech. So Google. At Google, I talked with a bunch of people who are working at the company. And one thing to know about Google is everything is custom there, including their IDE that they use. They don't use Visual Studio. They use a Visual Studio fork that they heavily customized. It's called Cider. This is a shorthand for some term that I'm not even sure what exactly it means. This used to be a web-based tool, but now it's a VS Code fork version, and there's also a web version called Cider-V. It's very heavily integrated into Google Stack, and this means that it has a bunch of like autocomplete. It has chat with IDE. It's integrated into their code review tool called Critique. It's integrated into Code Search, which is Google's internal tool that is very, very efficient. I mean, you would expect this from a search company, but most companies don't even have anywhere nearly as efficient Code Search. And this is where SourceGraph, a company, was born to create large-scale search that is almost as good as Google's Code Search. So Cider and Cider-V have a bunch of AI tools integrated. And now Google also has a tool called Jetski, which is Google's version of anti-gravity. Again, this is a screenshot from the Pragmatic Engineer Pulse episode. Jetski is pretty much anti-gravity integrated with Google's monorepo, and currently not yet integrated with Google's tools like Critique, and it doesn't have all the features that the Cider IDE has. So some engineers are using Jetski inside of the company, some people are using Cider and Cider-V, and so on. Now, the interesting thing about Google is a year ago I talked with engineers, and they were telling me like, nah, our AI tooling is not really impressive, but now it is. So Gemini, of course, is used internally with all the tools. It's picking up. People are liking it. People are using it. And like the adoption is just going organically a lot higher than it has before. Now, Google also built a lot of other tools internally. Some of them are made externally. NotebookLM is a tool where you can feed for example, your product requirement documents or user experience research docs and ask questions. It's also a public product. What is not public is the LLM prompt playground. It's similar to OpenAI's Dev Playground. Google has the Momo search engine, which is knowledge. It's a knowledge base that uses LLMs. And there's many, many more internal tools being built. A software engineer at Google told me that there's this org-specific Gen AI tooling happening everywhere because that's how, honestly, you get headcount these days. And cynically, they were saying that, that's how you get more funding. And in all fairness, like this might seem silly from the outside, but it makes a lot of sense because Google has always worked like this. They have a lot of internal innovation happening, and some of them turn into internal tools. Again, think back to products like Gmail, which were also came from an internal tool. So a lot of energy happening, and a lot of teams are building custom LLM tools. One more interesting detail for what Google is preparing for, as a former Google SRE engineer recently told me that they're hearing that their SRE friends currently inside of Google are saying that they're preparing for 10 times the line of codes making their way into production, and they're preparing all the infrastructure for it. So, Google is very data driven. If they're seeing this, it's likely it will happen. Over to Amazon. Now, Amazon is not as well known for their dev tools. They do have Amazon Q Developer Pro, which most people outside of Amazon don't even know about, but it works pretty well with AWS related use cases. It's a bit like a Copilot for Amazon. Amazon devs use it now a lot, and they're starting to like it. There's also Amazon Cairo. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's getting more internal usage. It's a more spec-based, I guess, response for Amazon to building software. It's a bit janky. I think until now, Amazon did not allow Claude Code to be used by its developers, which was pretty amusing. They wanted devs to use more Cairo, but it's unclear to me how popular Cairo is outside of Amazon. And I think Amazon is trying to make Cairo be more on par with Claude Code. Internally, so Amazon is a massive investor in Claude and giving a bunch of infrastructure. So Claude is hosted internally, and it's used a lot by developers for things like their PRFAC, which is Amazon's internal documentation structure, for perf in general, and for any and all writing tasks. Some quotes from developers I talked to using PRFAC for Claude, and also perf feedback with Claude, and some devs really like Amazon Q Developer Pro. One super interesting thing about Amazon that is unique to all the big tech companies I talk to is their MCP servers. Inside of Amazon, there's MCP servers everywhere. Now, most of their internal APIs, websites, tools already have MCP support, and they already had it a few months ago. And you can do cool stuff like you can hook up automation with the ticketing system, emails, internal systems offering an API, pretty much everything. It's just a pretty awesome way of doing things. And again, this makes sense because Amazon has always been API first. And if you have an API, adding an MCP on top of it is pretty trivial. And that's what they all did. Moving on to Meta. Meta has an internal tool for writing code as well. It's a Visual Studio Fork. And Meta built something really interesting in December called Trajectories. It shows the history of vibe-coded diffs in a code review tool. So when a diff or a pull request is raised, this is the meta language for it, you see the exact prompts that led to it. There's a little internal controversy about Trajectories when it was released because the team just released it and didn't tell anyone, and some devs were upset that their prompt history was out there. One engineer at Meta told me that they have started to write their diffs, their prompting in their own native language, I think Polish or something, so that fewer people could understand it. But in general, it's just very educational to see how people have been generating their diffs, and so some devs are learning from each other as well. Now, let's move on to more traditional companies. Here, I'm going to get some data from Lara Tacho, CTO, formerly CTO at DX, and she's also talking at the Sonar Summit. She told me something interesting. More traditional companies are still out ahead of big tech enterprises when it comes to adoption, especially in daily usage. She also notices that banks especially are experimenting more with AI tools so they can understand them better since they have to regulate them. Very interesting. And this is data from her that shows that more traditional companies, the daily usage of AI coding tools is slightly higher than at big tech, which is very, very surprising to me. And again, this is high quality data. Also at a private CTO event that I attended in November of this year, a tech company CTO was saying, we're struggling to get our devs to use AI tools on a daily basis. And he was asking if anyone has suggestions on what is working. And it was a director at the central Dutch bank who said, oh, we don't have this problem at all. Everyone, devs and business people alike, use these tools daily because because our mission is to understand them, so because of this we're doing it. And I was sitting there thinking, how crazy of an industry is there that a really traditional company or enterprise, a central bank, is ahead of AI adoption than a tech first company? It's just, how are these things flipped upside down? That's how interesting and unexpected this industry right now is. So let's move on to independent software engineers. Here, Armin Ronacher, he is the creator of Flask, a Python framework, and he was a founding engineer at Sentry, an observability and logging company. And he's got about 17, 18 years of professional experience. Now, he told me something really interesting. He said, if you would have told me even 6 months ago that I prefer being an engineering lead to a virtual programmer intern over hitting the keys myself, I would have not believed it. But even as I'm writing this blog post, Claude is doing some refactorings. He wrote about his experience. And I asked him, I did a podcast with him and I talked with him, I have a direct line with him. I asked him, Armin, what changed in your approach? And he told me a few things. First of all, Claude Code got shockingly good. This was in middle of last year. He also said that by using it extensively, he got over the hurdle of not accepting agents. And then he also said that the faults of the model can be avoided because now the tool can run the code and see what happens, and it can close the loop. And this closing the loop is really important, and it's something that keeps coming up again and again. And again, with closing the loop, verifying the code, validating it, that's a place where tests are important, but also tools like Sonar and similar ones can greatly help. Another person, Brigitte Buchler, distinguished engineer at ThoughtWorks with about 20 years of experience. We did a deep dive in the Pragmatic Engineer where she shared her learnings from 2 years of using AI tools for software engineering. And one of her learnings was that we should think of this AI teammate as not as human, but think of it as something like alien, or what she used is just a stubborn donkey who is eager to help, who is stubborn, who is very well read, but inexperienced, and who is overconfident. And it's just good to imagine something that is not a human, but more animal or alien or something like that. It has, like characteristics of a living thing, but it's 100% not human. And she found that this mental model really helped know how and when to use this tool. Simon Willison, creator of Django, independent software engineer, one of the best independent voices on anything AI models. He blogs several times a day. Andrej Karpathy, co-founder at OpenAI, tweeted this a while back saying how he is also reading Simon's blog. If you're not reading Simon's blog and you're interested in AI engineering, you absolutely should read it. So I asked Simon, how would you summarize the state of Gen AI tooling right now? And Simon said that coding agents are a thing that actually work now. You can run LM in a loop. You can let it execute compilers and tests and linters and other tools. You can give it a go and watch it do the work for you. And other tools, of course, Sonar, SonarQube are also included. And the model improvements in the last about 9 months have really tripped these tools over from fun toy demos to useful on a daily basis. And we see this everywhere, by the way. So if I sum up what has been happening, and I've been giving a version of this presentation over the past the past year or so, and these used to be yellow and red about a year ago that we didn't see much usage, but now everywhere. AI dev tools are having heavy usage, but this should not be surprising because if they don't use it, who else will? Big tech is seeing heavy usage. This is not used to be as heavy usage, by the way. Traditional companies are having the same or more usage as big tech. Again, this did not used to be the thing about 6 months ago even. And independent software engineers who have no kind of bias towards any of the AI companies. They have no interest in them. They're increasingly bullish on using AI. And again, these last two groups, traditional companies and independent software engineers, about 6 months ago, they were not nearly as bullish on AI, but now they are. And to me, this last two group is pretty interesting to take note of. And then, of course, we need to talk about the breakthrough and this very interesting winter break, where in December, most of the industry and most engineering leaders and software engineers realize that something big has changed. And I'm just going to quote Andrej Karpathy, who is OpenAI co-founder. He left OpenAI a while ago, and now he's building an AI startup. In October 2025, he said that overall the models are just not there. I feel like the industry is making too big of a jump and trying to pretend it is amazing, and it's not. It's slop. And in February this year, he wrote, it's hard to communicate how much programming has changed due to AI in the last 2 months. Not gradually and over time in the progress as usual way, but specifically last December. Programming is becoming unrecognizable. You're not typing computer code into an editor like the way things were since computers were invented. That era is over. You are spinning up AI agents, giving them tasks in English, and managing and reviewing their work in parallel. And this change is massive. And it's not just Andre. Here's a couple of respected software engineers who have built production systems. They don't fall for the hype. Adam Wathan, the creator of Tailwind CSS, wrote, anytime I have to type precise syntax by hand now feels like such a tedious chore, and programming is still fun, and surprisingly even more fun. DHH, the creator of Ruby on Rails, wrote how I've embraced the idea that getting a good draft really does speed up things quite often, and he still writes some code by hand, but he's also using agents a lot more. And Jana Dogan, distinguished engineer at Google, distinguished engineer at Google. In January, she wrote, she also had her breakthrough moment. She's been saying, we've been trying to build distributed agent orchestrators at Google since last year. There are various options. Not everyone is aligned. I gave Cloud Code a description of the problem and generated what we built last year in an hour. Now, there's nuances to this, but the efficiency jump has just been incredible. And Michelle Hashimoto, the creator of Ghosty, founder of Terraform, again, he writes extensively about how he is now using AI, and he just wrote, I never want to hear how AI isn't faster ever again. And with Michelle, I've released an in-depth podcast interview where he talks about his AI workflow. You can check it out on the Pragmatic Engineer. I also came to the same conclusion in January that the mega trend that we are seeing this year is AI is going to write almost all the code everywhere, pretty much. Now, why was this sudden change happening? Simon Willison sums it up pretty well. It feels like this was one of those moments with Opus 4.5 and GPT 5.2 released in November and December, where the models got incrementally better in a way that tips an invisible capacity line suddenly, and they can solve a lot harder problems than before. So software engineering is changing very, very drastically, and something big has happened in December. But we still have a lot of questions. So let me give you 3 of them. Number 1, are devs who are using more AI actually more productive than those who are not using it as much? And a head of engineering at a 30-person startup told me something interesting. He said, I see some of my devs burning a lot of tokens, but no real difference in the software they produce versus everyone else. And this is something I hear a lot, by the way. Now, my take is that all of this takes time because it's surprisingly a long time to get good at using these tools, and it's much longer than we assume. And Simon Willison, who has been experimenting with these tools since ChatGPT came out, so more than 3 years now, he told me something super interesting back I think 2 years ago. He said, or a year and a half ago, he said, right now, if you start with a theory of how LLMs work, it will hold you back. This specific technology with LLMs, it's weirdly harmful to spend too much time trying to understand how they actually work before you start playing with them because they're unintuitive. And this goes against everything that we do as engineers. As engineers, we typically understand things first and then use them. And here's an engineer, an amazing engineer, Simon, saying that it's just unintuitive if you do this. Second question, how will tooling change as a result of all this jump with an LLM capability? Will code reviews by humans make any sense at all when there's so much generated? Will we still have pull requests, for example? Like it's a good question. And Peter Steinberger, who is a creator of OpenClaw, a very, very popular project, and he is joining OpenAI. In 2019, he He's an amazing engineer, by the way. Like, met him, and even right now his output is incredible. In 2019, he shared his pull request merge guide. How he tediously reviewed pull requests, what expectations were at his company PSPDF kit with about 60 engineers. And in 2026, what he told me was, I don't like pull requests anymore. A large chunk of code change doesn't tell me how much about the intent or why it was done. I now prefer prompt request. Just share the prompt that you ran and I will run it. If I think it's good, I will run it myself and merge it. And this is a really, really good engineer. He's an amazing engineer, and he's just done with the concept of pull requests. Good question. Will CI run in the cloud locally or in both places? Will agents mean running a lot more automation, for example, linting, testing, verification, or are we going to see different ones? These are open questions. We will have to answer them, and there's no definite answer. I think that the suspicion is that we will have a lot more agent-specific tooling, by the way. Number 3, have we seen this kind of massive disruption before? The technology industry has been around for 70 plus years, and we've seen a lot of changes throughout that time. And I asked some veterans in the industry. Ken Beck, he's been a programmer for more than 52 years now professionally. I talked with him in the podcast. He was on the Pragmatic Summit as well. And I asked him, hey, Kent, how do you compare these past technology step changes that you've lived through compared to LLMs? And Ken said something interesting. He said, I've seen similar changes in the past impact-wise. In the 70s and 80s, when the shift went from microprocessors to mainframe computing, something similar. Then there was the internet, where the digital economy was completely changed. And then there was iPhone and Android, where suddenly things like live location sharing were possible and the percentage of being online dramatically increased. But the difference is that now it's faster. And he's saying that the whole landscape of what is cheap and what is expensive has just all shifted. There are things that we didn't do because we assumed they were going to be expensive and hard. They just got ridiculously cheap. And so we need to be trying things. I also asked Martin Fowler, chief architect at ThoughtWorks, author of the book Refactoring, and amazing. He advanced software engineering in so many different ways. I met him in person. We also met at the Pragmatic Summit. And he said this: I do not think AI is going to wipe out software development. I do think it will change it in a major way, though, like the change from assembly to high-level languages. And he talks about this abstraction shift. So in the end, what does this all mean for software engineering? I mean, I think it's a done deal that LLMs will write most of the code everywhere. They will generate, that is. But it will be experienced software engineers who will be doing the prompting, the guiding, and controlling them. I'm convinced of this one. And an interesting data point that comes from Cursor, this is Eric Zuckerson of Cursor, is how they found that senior engineers are much more effective with agents. And this research shows that agents amplify existing engineering output and they do not replace it. Now, there will be a lot more code generated, that is for sure. And now a lot more software that needs to work as expected. So we'll need a lot more verification. And we will not be able to keep up just doing it by hand. We will need tools. Sonar, SonarQube are examples of these tools. And of course, there will be other ones as well. And of course, we'll need a lot more infrastructure to support all this. You will need to rebuild our infrastructure. If you're inside a company, you will need to rethink your complete infrastructure layer, either building it yourself or figuring out how to use a vendor eventually. I'm sure there will be vendors popping up with all sorts of solutions. And so as closing, what are the skills that will be less valuable as software engineers and which will be more valuable in this new world? My take is that less valuable skills will include language-specific and framework-specific in-depth knowledge, because you can ask an LLM for this. Being good at implementing well-defined tasks and tickets is not going to be particularly valuable because agents can one-shot that. And being someone who sticks to existing, almost like traditional best practices at this point, without the flexibility to change your mind about them, will be holding you back. It's not just it can hold you back, it will hold you back. Things that are more valuable: being curious, open-minded, and experimenting with new tools and approaches, including agents, is almost like a baseline for succeeding. Being interested in the business as well, and not just the technology, will set you will help you add more business value, which I mean sounds kind of cliche, but it is what companies and teams increasingly will care about. And having a strong understanding of the fundamentals will allow you to guide agents the right way, to build software the right way, and to just know when to step back and when not to give, not to give the driving wheel to the agent, to like be the driver and not just like go on autopilot. But in closing, the software industry has not changed this rapidly in forever. I've asked so many people who have been around the industry for 50 plus years, and they all said the same thing. Change has not been this fast than it is now. And a good example of all of this is um, Anthropic released Claude Cowork, which is a pretty cool tool. You can use it on a desktop to like manipulate all your local files. I've used it. I really like it. And someone asks on X, how much of Claude code wrote Claude Cowork? And Boris Cherny, the creator of Claude Code, and also he was a contributor to Claude Cowork, he just said all of it. Like, how crazy! And this was the tool was built in 10 days. Having an AI create a production software that is used now by millions of people, Claude Cowork, and writing 100% of it, this would have been just absolutely like, if someone told me that this is happening even a year ago, I was like, no, it's science fiction. But here we are. It's happening. The industry is changing. And now this time is a defining one. I do believe that the practices that we will come up with how to best navigate, we will be using these for years, maybe even decades. So let's buckle up. It's time to build the future. So thank you very much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the summit.